Rapidez, concorrência cada vez maior, precisão, grandes fusões. As constantes transformações das empresas exigem negociações cada vez mais rápidas e precisas. Por isso, a HSM Management oferece a você esta nova palestra gravada com exclusividade para os assinantes e leitores da HSM Management por William Ury. Ele é reconhecido no mundo todo como um dos maiores especialistas em negociação e administração de conflitos da atualidade. Graduado em antropologia por Yale e com PhD por Harvard, Ury conduz há 2 décadas desde negociações empresariais e governamentais a conflitos entre grupos étnicos. Consultor de renome internacional, participa de negociações entre empresas, seus clientes e fornecedores, fusões de grandes companhias e greves em setores estratégicos. Autor das mais importantes obras já editadas na área, está mais atual do que nunca, contribuindo para que as empresas enfrentem seus maiores desafios. Neste vídeo, William Ury fala sobre um assunto de importância fundamental para o momento atual: as estratégias vencedoras para uma negociação mais efetiva. A você que acompanha a revista HSM Management, esta palestra é uma extensão natural do trabalho da HSM Cultura e Desenvolvimento, líder na organização de seminários internacionais na América Latina. A empresa completa 14 anos de existência no ano 2000 e tem como objetivo principal trazer à comunidade empresarial brasileira e de outros países da América Latina informação de ponta através dos maiores especialistas do mundo nas diversas áreas da administração de empresas. Estamos à sua disposição para críticas e sugestões. Muito obrigado e aproveite ao máximo a palestra de William Ury. Esperamos que atenda às suas expectativas.
We live in a world of negotiation, of back and forth communication trying to reach agreement. From the moment we get up in the morning, whether we realize it or not, we're negotiating. We're negotiating with our husbands or wives, our children or parents, even with our pets. And then when we get to the office, we start negotiating with our boss, our employees, our secretaries, our colleagues, our peers in other departments. And very importantly, we start to negotiate with our customers, our suppliers, and that's not even to speak of our bankers, our lawyers, our accountants, and even the tax authorities. If you think about how much time you spend negotiating, engaged in the act of back and forth communication, trying to reach agreement on some issue, however small, and think about what percentage of time it is, most people I know, they will give the answer, at least 50% of my time I'm spending negotiating. Some people will say it's 90%. And in today's climate, with all today's changes, that percentage is going up, not down. Negotiation is becoming the single most important skill for a manager in today's world. I'm William Ury. I'm the co-founder of the program on negotiation at Harvard. For the last 20 years, I have served as a negotiation consultant and as a mediator in situations ranging from corporate mergers to strikes in coal mines to wars in the Middle East, Africa, and the former Soviet Union. And I think that the reason why negotiation is becoming so important is because of the knowledge revolution and the changes that that brings in our organizations and in the way in which human beings relate to each other. As organizations go from vertical, hierarchical pyramids and flatten themselves into horizontal networks, there is a revolution that takes place in the way in which people make decisions. From giving orders from top to bottom to negotiating horizontally. If you think about your job nowadays and how you get it done, we are literally dependent nowadays on dozens of individuals and organizations over whom we exercise no direct control. We cannot simply give them orders. We are compelled to negotiate. Think for a moment about the 10 most important decisions that you had to make last year. You're a decision maker. What were the decisions that had the greatest impact on the bottom line, on your profits, on your performance at work, or even on your satisfaction at home? Think about how you had to make those decisions. How many of them could you just make unilaterally, just by yourself? And how many of them did you actually have to reach in consultation with others through some process of shared decision-making? In other words, through negotiation. Most people I know would give the answer, 9 out of 10 I spend negotiating, or 10 out of 10 I negotiate. Negotiation is the preeminent process for making decisions in our business lives, in our personal lives, and in the world of politics. Negotiation is not easy. A lot of people do not actually like to negotiate. And if you ask them why, you often find that it's because they see themselves in a dilemma. Most of the people that we negotiate with, after all, are people that we know, with whom we have an ongoing relationship. They're our customers, they're our partners, they're our colleagues, they're our family members. And we're constantly in a dilemma as to whether or not we should adopt a soft approach or a hard approach. In hard negotiation, we see ourselves essentially as adversaries. The goal is victory, and the standard moves in the game are to take a rigid position, to dig into it, not to make any concessions, to distrust the other side, and to try to win the confrontation. Now, in the soft approach, on the other hand, we see ourselves as colleagues or friends, and the goal is not victory, it's agreement. The standard moves in the game are not to dig into a position, but to be flexible, to make offers, to trust the other side, and to avoid confrontation. Now, it's interesting, my colleagues at Harvard and I studied a great many negotiators in different domains, from business to law to diplomacy. And we asked ourselves, were they adopting a soft approach or a hard approach? And what we found is that they were adopting neither. They were neither soft nor hard, nor were they just somewhere in between, nor were they saying, I'm just soft with some people and I'm hard with others. Rather, they were adopting a third approach that combined some of the elements of soft with the elements of hard. If they were soft on the people that they were negotiating with. And if they were hard on the problem that needed to be solved. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine once led a business delegation in to meet with the president of Peru. He was a Peruvian businessman. And they went in to discuss the problems that the business community was having. And as the meeting went on, my friend noticed that as the business leaders brought up their problems with the president was getting increasingly defensive and started attacking or counterattacking the points that were being made. So my friend interrupted the meeting and said, look, I'm afraid we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. We came here to acknowledge you, Mr. President, for all the remarkable reforms that you have made to strengthen the economy of our country. And we're here to see if we can help you in the business community continue and advance your reforms. Well, once he had said that, the president relaxed, He began to participate actively in the conversation. The meeting went on 3 times longer than scheduled, and at the end, the president asked the business leaders present to serve in his own administration, in his own government, as the advocates of the business community. That's the advantage of being soft on the people if you need to be hard on the problem. In fact, the harder you need to be on the problem, the more you need to get your interests met, the softer you need to be on the people. Soft on the people, hard on the problem. Now, there are 7 basic principles for negotiating that epitomize this approach of being soft on the people and hard on the problem. The first 2 have to do with the people. The second 3 principles have to do with the problem that you're trying to solve, the opportunity that you're trying to realize. And the last 2 principles have to do with the proposals that are being made. This is the phase that we normally think of as negotiation, when each side is exchanging offers. So you start with the people, that's phase 1. You then move on to the problem, trying to solve the problem, that's phase 2. And then you end up in phase 3 of exchanging proposals. I would like to review those 7 principles with you. And as I do, I think you'll find it valuable if you have in mind at least one difficult negotiation that you may be currently facing. Some situation that's giving you trouble. It may be with a colleague, it may be with a customer. As we go through this fundamental framework, if you take a look at how would this work for you, how would these principles work for you in your own particular situation, I think you may get an idea or 2 about how to approach the situation. We start with the people. The first principle in negotiation has nothing to do with influencing the other side. It has everything to do with influencing ourselves. Human beings are reaction machines. It is so easy to lose perspective in a negotiation, to lose sight of what we're trying to achieve. When angry, we make the best speech we will ever regret. Let me give you an example. There was a negotiation once between the state of Arizona and a very large computer company which had been hired to manage the welfare and health payments for the poor and elderly of that state. Well, 1/4 of the way through the year, half the budget on that contract had been exhausted. The state officials panicked. They took the work, they took the contract back from the company. The company was very upset. So were the state officials. They had to have a negotiation about a computer, a $50 million computer, all the hardware and software that had all the data necessary to do the work on that computer. Now that computer was worth nothing to the company. It was worth everything to the state. It would have taken them more than $50 million to recreate, not even to speak of the time involved. And yet, because of the anger on both sides, both the company and the state walked away from that negotiation. The company lost the $50 million as well as the contract. The state had a great deal of trouble to do the work. It was a lose-lose outcome. Now, the way to avoid such outcomes, such disasters, the way that successful negotiators use is not to react in a situation, but rather to go to the balcony, to go to a place above the negotiation, almost imagining that the negotiation takes place here on a stage. They go to a place above the negotiation where they can get some perspective on the negotiation. They can remember what the prize is. They can keep themselves focused on what they want in that negotiation, an agreement that works for both sides. Let's go to that balcony. Here we are on the balcony, getting some perspective on the negotiation, keeping our eyes focused on what is it that we want to get out of this negotiation. We go to the balcony before the negotiation when we prepare for that negotiation. Preparation is key. We ought to prepare a minute for every minute that we spend talking with the other side. We go to the balcony during the negotiation, constantly. When the other side says something that makes us react, that gets us angry, we pause for a moment. We don't reply yet. As Thomas Jefferson once said, when angry, count to 10. If very angry, 100. You focus on what is it that you want to achieve out of that negotiation. We go to the balcony when we take a coffee break, and we talk with our teammates about how best to readjust our strategy. And then we go to the balcony after the negotiation ends to talk about what worked, what didn't work, what should we do differently next time. Learning is key in negotiation. It's so easy in a negotiation to lose perspective, to lose sight of what we want. The key is to be able to go to the balcony, to be able to get that mental perspective. That's why going to the balcony is the foundation for a successful negotiation. If the first principle of this method is to go to the balcony, the second is to step to the other side. It's to put yourself in their shoes. If someone were to ask me, what is the single most important skill that a negotiator needs to have? It's this ability to put yourself in the other side's shoes and see the world the way they see it. Negotiation, after all, is an exercise in influence. You're trying to change someone else's mind. You need to start, therefore, from where their mind is, not from where yours is. I remember my uncle once coming to visit me at Harvard. It was his 25th alumni reunion. And at one point he took me aside and he said, "You know, Bill, it's taken me 25 years to unlearn what I learned at Harvard Law School." He said, "What I learned at Harvard Law School is that all that counts in life are the facts. Who's right and who's wrong. And what has taken me 25 years of being in the world of business is to discover that just as important as the facts are people's perceptions of those facts. Unless you're able to put yourself in their shoes, understand the way they see the situation, you're never going to be that effective at either making a deal or settling a dispute." And the key way of putting yourself in their shoes, of stepping to their side, is to listen. It's the simplest. I remember once being in a union management negotiation, one which was very difficult, which had led to a strike in the previous time, and it looked like it was going towards a strike again. But there was a breakthrough in the negotiations. Things started to get more positive. And if you looked for the moment of that breakthrough, it was when one side, in this case the union, began to listen. Instead of reacting to what management said, instead of arguing with management, they said, "Tell us some more about what you mean." That's when the conversation shifted. Listening is key. If you actually observe the practice of successful negotiators, you'll find that they actually listen far more than they talk. We often think the best negotiator is the best talker, but really the best negotiator is the best listener. And that's why it's useful, for instance, as a practical technique. We often appoint a spokesperson, someone on our team who's going to speak. It's just as important to appoint a listener. It's all part of putting yourself in their shoes. Up in the other side's shoes is to understand their culture. Culture, after all, is a language. It's a communication system. And if you don't understand it, you're not going to get that far in a negotiation. I remember one incident where a large American automobile manufacturer, the vice president of this company, had a meeting with his Korean partner who owned an automobile company there in Korea. And the American company was interested in increasing its share. It had 10% of this Korean company. It wanted to increase its share to 50%. And the vice president asked his Korean colleague, the president of the Korean company, if this was possible. And the answer came back from the Korean president, that is not impossible. So the American went back to Detroit. He got all organized. He sent a high-level team over to Seoul to have a meeting to discuss buying 40%, an extra 40% of the Korean company. Well, they couldn't even have a meeting with their Korean counterparts. They were always excuses, and they were chasing their Korean counterparts around Seoul for 2 weeks until finally some kindly Korean took them aside and explained to them that that is not impossible in Korean culture means over my dead body. Never. In fact, the Korean president had no interest in selling that 40%. He was just being polite and not saying no. That underscores the importance of putting yourself in the other side's shoes, understanding their culture, their language, if you're going to negotiate effectively. Now, you've gone to the balcony. You've stepped to their side. In other words, we've dealt with the people aspect of the negotiation. Now we have to deal with the problem. We've been soft on the people, now we have to be hard on the problem. What does hard on the problem mean? Hard on the problem doesn't mean what we often think it means, which means being hard on your positions, really asserting your positions rigidly. Hard on the problem rather means being hard in asserting your interests, not your positions. Now, this distinction between interests and positions is the most critical distinction in problem-solving negotiation. It may sound like it's the same thing. It's what you want. Your position is what you want. Your interests are what you want. But there's a critical distinction. And maybe the best way to illustrate that distinction is with the example of the two sisters who were quarreling about an orange. They had an orange, and each sister wanted the orange. They had a big quarrel about it, and so finally in the end, they took a knife and they cut the orange in half so that each sister had half of an orange. Now, one sister took her half, peeled it, and used the peel for baking a cake. The other sister took her half, peeled it, and ate the fruit. So they ended up with a half a peel for one and a half a fruit from the other, when they might very well, if they had looked behind the position of the orange for what were the underlying interests in cooking and in eating, they might very well have ended up with a whole peel for one and a whole fruit for the other. And that's often, in that simple example, that's what we often do in negotiation, is we end up dividing the orange and ending up with less than what we might otherwise have ended up with. That's the importance of always focusing behind positions, what people say they want. Positions are their demands. It's the money, it's the numbers, it's the quota. Always focusing behind the positions for what actually are the underlying interests, which are people's concerns, their needs, their desires, their aspirations, their fears. In this case, it was cooking and eating, so that you can then end up with the equivalent of a whole peel for one and a whole fruit for the other. The place to be hard in a negotiation is to be hard in asserting your interests in cooking and eating, rather than to be hard on the position of wanting that orange. Let me give you an example from business. I was once mediating a discussion between a union and management. The most bitter issue between them was the issue of outsourcing jobs. For the company wanted the ability to outsource jobs to other companies that were non-union companies. The company said this was absolutely necessary. Their position was, yes, we need it. And the union's position was no. And it seemed like this situation would lead to a strike. But when we looked behind each side's positions, when we asked the magical question, why is it that you need that? We asked management, why do you need outsourcing? The interest behind it was they wanted flexibility. They wanted the flexibility to meet customer demand when it went up and when it went down. And they wanted the ability to maintain or even enhance their position in the global marketplace. When we asked the union why they didn't want outsourcing, why that was their position, they said their interest was security. They were concerned about losing their jobs. So then the problem became not outsourcing yes or no, but how do we simultaneously meet management's interest in flexibility and the union's interest in security? And by focusing on their interests, they were then able to come up with some creative ideas that later got reflected in the settlement. That's the power of looking behind positions for the underlying interests. That's the third principle in this negotiation methodology. Why it's so important to focus on interests is to be able to take advantage of the single greatest opportunity that you have as a negotiator, which is to invent options for mutual gain. Instead of seeing the pie as fixed, what you find successful negotiators do is they expand the pie first before they divide it up. They do that by being creative. Imagine that in any negotiation that you're involved in, there's a pile of gold on the table in front of you. That gold represents the joint gain that both sides can have if only they can agree on one thing. How do we divide it up? How do we divide up the gold? Yet time and again, if you look at negotiations, people walk away from the table without an agreement, leaving all the gold still on the table, or they walk away with agreements where they only take part of the gold away. They leave much of the gold still on the table. Now, how do you get the gold off the table? The way to do that is to be creative. Let me give you an example. A number of years ago, there was a negotiation in the United States, and it involved the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon was hard to see at the time. There was air pollution that created a haze. The community got aroused. The government got involved. They passed a regulation saying that the plant, there was a coal-fired plant 100 miles away, that it needed to essentially meet a certain air quality standard every month that was going to be measured every month. To do that, the company had to buy 2 scrubbing machines, each one costing millions. The company was very unhappy. The environmentalists were also unhappy because they thought that the level, the standard, was not high enough. Normally, this kind of issue would have been fought out in courts and in litigation for years, except that through a creative conversation, both sides got together, the company and the environmentalists, and they began to negotiate. They began to look at the interests of each side, and they began to invent options for mutual gain. And they discovered that, in fact, if you didn't measure the air quality every month, if you didn't have to do that, but only measured it on an average over the year, that under that case, the company was willing to meet a much higher air level standard because they would only have to buy 1 scrubbing machine. So they would save a lot of money. They were very happy. The environmentalists were happy because the air quality over the year was higher. And the community was happy because they could see the Grand Canyon again. It was a triple win. A win for the community, a win for the company, and a win for the environmentalists. That's what you're trying to get at when you're engaged in inventing options for mutual gain.